हेलो एवरीवन, वेलकम टू द लाइव सेशन। तो आज हम शुरू करेंगे एनसीईआरटी हिस्ट्री क्लास 6 का चैप्टर नंबर 3, जो कि है इन द अर्लीस्ट सिटीज़। तो शुरू करते हैं आज का चैप्टर। सेविंग एन ओल्ड बिल्डिंग, जसपल एंड हरप्रीत were playing cricket in the lane outside their home when they noticed the people who were admiring the dilapidated old building that the children called the haunted house. "Look at the architecture," said one of the men. "Have you seen the fine wood carving?" asked one of the women. "We must write to the minister so that she makes arrangements to repair and preserve this beautiful house." Why, they wondered, would anybody be interested in the old run-down house? The story of Harappa. Very often, old buildings have a story to tell. Nearly 150 years ago, when railway lines were being laid down for the first time in the Punjab, engineers stumbled upon the site of Harappa in present-day Pakistan. To them, it seemed like a mound that was a rich source of ready-made high-quality bricks. So they carried off thousands of bricks from the walls of the old buildings of the city to build railway lines. Many buildings were completely destroyed. Then, about 80 years ago, archaeologists found the site and realized that this was one of the oldest cities in the subcontinent. As this was the first city to be discovered, all other sites from where similar buildings and other things were found were described as Harappan. These cities developed about 4700 years ago. Very often, old buildings are pulled down to make way for new construction. Do you think it is important to preserve old buildings? What was special about these cities? Many of these cities were divided into two or more parts. Usually, the part to the west was smaller but higher. Archaeologists describe this as the citadel. Generally, the part to the east was larger but lower. This is called the lower town. Very often, walls of baked bricks were built around each part. The bricks were so well baked that they have lasted for thousands of years. The bricks were laid in an interlocking pattern and that made the walls strong. In some cities, special buildings were constructed on the citadel. For example, in Mohenjo-daro, a very special tank, which archaeologists call the Great Bath, was built in this area. This was lined with bricks coated with plaster and made watertight with a layer of natural tar. There were steps leading down to it from two sides. While there were rooms on all sides, water was probably brought in from a well and drained out after use. Perhaps important people took a dip in this tank on special occasions. Other cities such as Kalibangan and Lothal had fire altars where sacrifices may have been performed, and some cities like Mohenjo-daro, Harappa, and Lothal had elaborate storehouses. Houses, trains, and streets. Generally, houses were either one or two stories high, with rooms built around a courtyard. Most houses had a separate bathing area and some had wells to supply water. Many of the cities had covered drains. Notice how carefully these were laid out in straight lines. Although you cannot see it, each drain had a gentle slope so that water could flow through it. Very often, drains in houses were connected to those on the streets, and smaller drains led into bigger ones. As the drains were covered, inspection holes were provided at intervals to clean them. All three houses, drains, and streets were probably planned and built at the same time. List at least two differences between the houses described here and those that you studied about in chapter 2. Life in the city. A Harappan city was a very busy place. There were people who planned the constructions of special buildings in the city. These were probably the rulers. It is likely that the rulers sent people to distant lands to get metal, precious stones, and other things that they wanted. They may have kept the most valuable objects, such as ornaments of gold and silver or beautiful beads, for themselves. And there were scribes, people who knew how to write, who helped prepare the seals and perhaps wrote on other materials that have not survived. Besides, there were men and women craftspersons making all kinds of things, either in their own homes or in special workshops. People were traveling to distant lands or returning with raw materials and perhaps stories. Many terracotta toys have been found, and children must have played with these. Make a list of the people who lived in the city. Were any of these people listed as living in villages such as Mehergarh? New crafts in the city. Let us look at some of the objects that were made and found in Harappan cities. Most of the things that have been found by archaeologists are made of stone, shell, and metal, including copper, bronze, gold, and silver. Copper and bronze were used to make tools, weapons, ornaments, and vessels. Gold and silver were used to make ornamental and vessels. Perhaps the most striking finds are those of beads, weights, and blades. The Harappans also made seals out of stone. These are generally rectangular and usually have an animal carved on them. The Harappans also made pots with beautiful black designs such as the one shown on page 6. Was metal used in the villages you learned about in chapter 2? Was stone used to make weights? Cotton was probably grown at Mehergarh from about 7,000 years ago. Actual pieces of cloth were found attached to the lid of a silver vase and some copper objects at Mohenjo-daro. Archaeologists have also found spindle holes made of terracotta and fans. These were used to spin thread. Fence. Unlike stone or shell that are found naturally, fence is a material that is artificially produced. A gum was used to shape sand or powdered quartz into an object. The objects were then glazed, resulting in a shiny glassy surface. The colors of the glaze were usually blue or sea green. Fence was used to make beads, bangles, earrings, and tiny vessels. Many of the things that were produced were probably the work of specialists. A specialist is a person who is trained to do only one kind of work. For example, cutting stone or polishing beads or carving seals. Look at the illustration and see how well the face is carved and how carefully the beard is sewn. This must have been the work of an expert craftsperson. Not everybody could have been a specialist. We do not know whether only men were specialists or only women were specialists. Perhaps some women and men may have been specialists. In search of raw materials. Raw materials are substances that are either found naturally, such as wood or ores of metals, or produced by farmers or herderers. These are then processed to produce finished goods. For example, cotton produced by farmers is a raw material that may be processed to make cloth. While some of the raw materials that the Harappans used were available locally, many items such as copper, tin, gold, silver, and precious stones had to be brought from distant places. The Harappans probably got copper from present-day Rajasthan and even from Oman in West Asia. Tin, which was mixed with copper to produce bronze, may have been brought from present-day Afghanistan and Iran. Gold could have come all the way from present-day Karnataka and precious stones from present-day Gujarat, Iran, and Afghanistan. Food for people in the cities. While many people lived in the cities, others living in the countryside grew crops and reared animals. These farmers and herders supplied food to craftspersons, scribes, and rulers in the cities. We know from remains of plants that the Harappans grew wheat, barley, pulses, peas, rice, sesame, linseed, and mustard. A new tool, the plug, was used to dig the earth for turning the soil and planting seeds. while real plugs, which were probably made of wood, have not survived. Toy models have been found. As this region does not receive heavy rainfall, some forms of irrigation may have been used. This means that the water was stored and supplied to the fields when the plants were growing. The Harappans reared cattle, sheep, goat, and buffalo. Water and pastures were available around settlements. However, in the dry summer months, large herds of animals were probably taken to greater distances in search of grass and water. They also collected fruits like bear, caught fish, and hunted wild animals like the antelope. A closer look, Harappan towns in Gujarat. The city of Dholavira was located on Khadir Bed, also spelled as bed, in the run of Kutch, where there was fresh water and fertile soil. Unlike some of other Harappan cities, which were divided into two parts, Dholavira was divided into three parts, and each part was surrounded with massive stone walls with entrances through gateways. There was also a large open area in the settlement where public ceremonies could be held. Other finds include large letters of the Harappan scripts that were carved out of white stone and perhaps inlaid in wood. This is a unique find as generally Harappan writings has been found on small objects such as seals. The city of Lothal stood beside a tributary of the Sabarmati in Gujarat, close to the Gulf of Khambhat. It was situated near areas where raw materials such as semi-precious stones were easily available. This was an important center for making objects out of stone, shell, and metal. There was also a storehouse in the city. Many seals and sealings, the impression of seals on clay, were found in this storehouse. A building that was found here was probably a workshop for making beads. Pieces of stone, half made beads, tools for bead making, and finished beads have all been found here. Seals and sealings. Seals may have been used to stamp bags or packets containing goods that were sent from one place to another. After a bag was closed or tied, a layer of wet clay was applied on the knot and the seal was pressed on it. The impression of the seal is known as a sealing. If the sealing was intact, one could be sure that the goods had arrived safely. Seals are used even today. Find out what they are used for. The mystery of the ant. Around 3900 years ago, we find the beginning of a major change. People stopped living in many of the cities. Writing, seals, and weights were no longer used. Raw materials brought from long distances became rare. In Mohenjo-daro, we find that garbage piled up on the streets. The drainage system broke down, and new, less impressive houses were built even over the streets. Why did all this happen? We are not sure. Some scholars suggest that the rivers dried up. Others suggest that there was deforestation. This could have happened because fuel was required for baking bricks and for smelting copper ores. Besides, grazing by large herds of cattle, sheep, and goat may have destroyed the green cover. In some areas, there were floods, but none of these reasons can explain the end of all the cities. Flooding or a river drying up would have had an effect in only some areas. It appears as if the rulers lost control. In any case, the effects of the change are quite clear. Sites in Sindh and West Punjab, present Pakistan, were abandoned, while many people moved into newer, smaller settlements to the east and the south. New cities emerged about 1400 years later. You will read about them in chapter 5 and 8. Elsewhere, find Egypt in your atlas. Most of Egypt is a dry desert except for the lands along the river Nile. Around 5000 years ago, kings ruled over Egypt. These kings sent armies to distant lands to get gold, silver, ivory, timber, and precious stones. They also built huge tombs known as pyramids. When they died, the bodies of kings were preserved and buried in these pyramids. These carefully preserved bodies are known as mummies. A large number of objects were also buried with them. These included food and drink, clothes, ornaments, utensils, musical instruments, weapons, and animals. Sometimes even serving men and women were buried with the rulers. These are amongst the most elaborate burials known in the world history. Do you think kings would have needed these things after death? तो ये चैप्टर ख़त्म हो गया और ये है इस चैप्टर का एक्सरसाइज. तो अब हम शुरू करेंगे चैप्टर 4. What books and burials tells us. Mary in the library. As the bell rang, the teacher asked the students to follow him because they were going to the library for the first time. When Mary stepped inside, she found that the library was much larger than their classroom, and there were so many shelves, all full of books. In one corner was a cupboard filled with large old volumes. Seeing her trying to open the cupboard, the teacher said, "That cupboard has very special books on different religions. Did you know what we have a set of the Vedas?" "What are the Vedas?" Mary wondered. "Let us find out." One of the oldest books in the world. You may have heard about the Vedas. There are four of them: the Rig Veda, Samveda, Yajurveda, and Atharva Veda. The oldest Veda is the Rig Veda, composed about 3500 years ago. The Rig Veda includes more than 1000 hymns called Sukta or well said. These hymns are in praise of various gods and goddesses. Three gods are especially important: Agni, the god of fire, Indra, a warrior god, and Soma, a plant from which a special drink was prepared. These hymns were composed by sages or rishis. Priests taught students to recite and memorize each syllable, word, and sentence, bit by bit, with great care. Most of the hymns were composed, taught, and learned by men. A few were composed by women. The Rig Veda is in Old or Vedic Sanskrit, which is different from the Sanskrit you learn in school these days. Sanskrit and other languages. Sanskrit is part of a family of languages known as Indo-European. Some Indian languages such as Assamese, Gujarati, Hindi, Kashmiri, and Sindhi. Asian languages such as Persian and many European languages such as English, French, German, Greek, Italian, and Spanish belong to this family. They are called a family because they originally had words in common. Take the word Matra Sanskrit, Ma Hindi, and Mother English. Do you notice any similarities? Other languages used in the subcontinent belong to different families. For instance, those used in the northeast belong to the Tibeto-Burman family. Tamil, Telugu, Kannada, and Malayalam belong to the Dravidian family, and the languages spoken in Jharkhand and parts of central India belong to the Austroasiatic family. This lists the languages you have heard about and try to identify the families to which they belong. The books we use are written and printed. The Rig Veda was recited and heard rather than read. It was written down several centuries after it was first composed and printed less than 200 years ago. How historians study the Rig Veda. Historians, like archaeologists, find out about the past, but in addition to the material remains, they examine written sources as well. Let us see how they study the Rig Veda. Some of the hymns in the Rig Veda are in the form of dialogues. This is part of one such hymn, a dialogue between a sage named Vishwamitra and two rivers, Vyas and Satluj, that were worshipped as goddesses. Vishwamitra and the rivers. Vishwamitra, O rivers, come down from the mountains like two swift horses, like two shining cows that lick their calves. You move like chariots to the sea through the power of Indra. You are full of water and wish to unite with one another. The rivers. We who are full of water move along the path the gods have made for us. Once we start flowing, we cannot be stopped. Why do you pray to us, O sage? Vishwamitra, O sisters, please listen to me, the singer who has come from a distance with his chariots and carts. Let your waters not rise above our axles so that we can cross safely. The rivers. We will listen to your prayers so that you can cross safely. Historians point out that this hymn was composed in the area where these rivers flow. They also suggest that the sages lived in a society where horses and cows were valued animals. That is why the rivers are compared to horses and cows. Do you think chariots were also important? Give reasons for your answer. Read the verses and find out what are the modes of transport that are mentioned. Other rivers, especially the Indus and its other tributaries and Saraswati, are also named in hymns. The Ganga and Yamuna are named only once. Cattle, horses, and chariots. There are many prayers in the Rig Veda for cattle, children, especially sons, and horses. Horses were yoked to chariots that were used in battles, which were fought to capture cattle. Battles were also fought for land, which was important for pasture and for growing hardy crops that ripened quickly, such as barley. Some battles were fought for water and to capture people. Some of the wealth was often was kept by the leaders, some was given to the priest, and the rest was distributed amongst the people. Some wealth was used for the performance of yagnas or sacrifices in which offerings were made into the fire. These were meant for gods and goddesses. Offerings could include ghee, grain, and in some cases animals. Most men took part in these wars. There was no regular army, but there were assemblies where people met and discussed matters of war and peace. They also chose leaders who were often brave and skillful warriors. Words to describe people. There are several ways of describing people. In terms of work they do, the language they speak, the place they belong to, their family, their communities, and cultural practices. Let us see some of the words used to describe people and found in the Rig Veda. There are two groups who are described in the terms of their work: the priests, sometimes called Brahmins, who performed various rituals, and the Rajas. These Rajas were not like the ones you will be learning about later. They did not have capital cities, palaces, or armies, nor did they collect taxes. Generally, sons did not automatically succeed fathers as Rajas. Read the previous sections once more and see whether you can find out what the Rajas did. Two words were used to describe the people or the community as the whole. One was the word jana, which we still use in Hindi and other languages. The other was vis. The word Vaisya comes from vis. You will learn more about this in chapter 5. Several vis or jana are mentioned by names, so we find reference to the Puru jana or vis, the Bharata jana or vis, and the Yadu jana or vis, and so on. Do any of these names sound familiar? Sometimes the people who composed the hymns described themselves as Aryas and called their opponents Dasas or Dasyus. These were people who did not perform sacrifices and probably spoke different languages. Later, the term Dasa and the feminine Dasi came to mean slave. Slaves were women and men who were often captured in war. They were treated as property of their owners, who could make them do whatever work they wanted. While the Rigveda was being composed in the northwest of the subcontinent, there were other developments elsewhere. Let us look at some of these. Silent Sentinels, the story of the megaliths. Look at the illustration on the next page. These stone boulders are known as megaliths, literally big stones. These were carefully arranged by people and were used to mark burial sites. The practice of erecting megaliths began about 3000 years ago and was prevalent throughout the Deccan, South India, in the northeast, and Kashmir. Some important megalith sites are shown on map 2. While some megaliths can be seen on the surface, other megalithic burials are often underground. Sometimes archaeologists find a circle of stone boulders or a single large stone standing on the ground. These are the only indications that there are burials beneath. There were several things that people did to make megaliths. We have made a list here. Try and arrange them in the correct order: digging pits in the earth, transporting stones, breaking boulders, placing stones in position, finding suitable stone, shaping stones, burying the dead. All these burials have some common features. Generally, the dead were buried with distinctive pots which are called black and red ware. Also found are tools and weapons of iron and sometimes skeletons of horses, horse equipment and ornaments of stone and gold. Was iron used in the Harappan cities? Finding out about social differences. Archaeologists think that objects found with a skeleton probably belong to the dead person. Sometimes more objects are found in one grave than in another. Find Brahmagiri on map 2. Here, one skeleton was buried with 33 gold beads, 2 stone beads, 4 copper bangles, and 1 conch shell. Other skeletons have only a few pots. This find suggests that there was some difference in status amongst the people who were buried. Some were rich, others poor, some chiefs, others followers. Were some burial spots meant for certain families. Sometimes megaliths contains more than one skeleton. This indicates that people, perhaps belonging to the same family, were buried in the same place, though not at the same time. The bodies of those who died later were brought into the grave through the portholes. Stone circles or boulders placed on the surface probably served as signposts to find the burial site so that people could return to the same place whenever they wanted to. A special burial at Inamgaon. Find Inamgaon on map 2. It is a site on the river Ghoth, a tributary of the Bhima. It was occupied between 3600 and 2700 years ago. Here, adults were generally buried in the ground, laid out straight with the head towards the north. Sometimes burials were within the houses. Vessels that probably contained food and water were placed with the dead. One man was found buried in a large 4-legged clay jar in the courtyard of a 5-roomed house, one of the largest houses at the site. In in the center of the settlement. This house also had a granary. The body was placed in a cross-legged position. Do you think this was the body of a chief? Give reasons for your answer. What skeleton tells us? It is easy to make out the skeleton of a child from its small size. However, there are no major differences in the bones of a girl and a boy. Can we make out whether a skeleton was that of a man or a woman? Sometimes people decide on the basis of what is found with the skeleton. For instance, if a skeleton is found with jewelry, it is sometimes thought to be that of a woman. However, there are problems with this. Often men also wore ornaments. A better way of figuring out the sex of a skeleton is to look at the bone structure. The hip or the pelvic area of women is generally larger to enable childbearing. These distinctions are based on modern skeletal studies. About 2000 years ago, there was a famous physician named Charaka who wrote a book on medicine known as the Charaka Samhita. There he states the human body has 360 bones. This is a much larger number than the 200 bones that are recognized in modern anatomy. Charaka arrived at this figure by counting the teeth, joints, and cartilage. How do you think he found out about the human body in such great detail? Occupation at Inamgaon. Archaeologists have found seeds of wheat, barley, rice, pulses, millets, peas, and sesame. Bones of a number of animals, many bearing cut marks that show that they may have been used as food, have also been found. This includes cattle, buffalo, goat, sheep, dog, horse, ass, pig, sambar, spotted deer, black buck, antelope, hare, and mongoose. Besides birds, crocodile, turtle, crab, and fish, there is evidence that fruits such as ber, amla, jamun, dates, and a variety of berries were collected. Use this evidence to list the possible occupation of the people at Inamga. Elsewhere, find China in your atlas. Around 3500 years ago, we find some of the first evidence of writing in China. These writings were on animal bones. These are called oracle bones because they were used to predict the future. Kings got scribes to write questions on the bones. Would they win battles? Would the harvest be good? Would they have sons? The bones were then put into the fire and they cracked because of the heat. Then fortune tellers studied these cracks and tried to predict the future. As you may expect, they sometimes made mistakes. These kings lived in palaces in cities. They amassed vast quantities of wealth, including large, elaborately decorated bronze vessels. However, they did not know the use of iron. List one difference between the Raja of the Rig Veda and these kings. तो ये है इस चैप्टर का एक्सरसाइज और हमारा ये चैप्टर भी कंप्लीट हो गया है। तो आज के लिए इतना ही। डेली लाइव क्लास ज्वाइन करने के लिए चैनल को सब्सक्राइब कर दीजिए और नोटिफिकेशन आइकन पर क्लिक कर दीजिए और वीडियो अच्छा लगे तो लाइक कर दीजिए। तो आज का सेशन यहीं तक था। थैंक यू, थैंक्स फॉर ज्वाइनिंग।